Welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast, where I, Genevieve Faulkner, share what I'm becoming aware of.
Hello and welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast. My name is Genevieve Faulkner, your host. Today I want to talk to you guys about firing the inner critic or going beyond the inner critic. So one of the ways we stop ourselves a lot in the creation of our reality or the creation of our future or the creation of great relationships is by criticizing ourselves. And this is something that there's a number of reasons why people do this. And a lot of the time, people don't even realize the degree that they are doing this. And so I wanted to create this podcast episode as a way of inviting you to actually get present with you and your world and start to pay attention to the areas of life or the times in which you are doing this. So when do you start to judge or criticize you? When you're doing that, that is actually a place or area of your life that you're eliminating growth. So it's a way of maintaining control. Now, part of the reason you might be doing that is because within our energetic fields and within our DNA, we have a lot of the time all sorts of traumas that we don't realize that we have. Okay, so when we have trauma that is unprocessed, that we haven't transmuted out, we can have all sorts of different belief systems about what's occurred. And our brains create this kind of like control mechanism designed to stop us from having the same thing happening again, basically. And so you might be actually criticizing yourself or judging yourself as a way of stopping yourself being in flow with the expansion of your being so that awful things don't happen when you go into the unknown space of what it is that's unknown, right? So it might be that you've decided, like, if you expand, if you grow, if your reality gets greater, all of these awful things that were traumatic, that maybe weren't even something that happened to you, but something that happened to your ancestors that maybe on a conscious level you're not even aware of, will happen again. And it will be awful and devastating. And, it will bring up all that kind of like stuff from the past that's there that maybe you don't quite realize is there. And so this is what you can be doing as a way of avoiding all of that. So it sounds bizarre, but there is a reason why we often do this. And so that can be that. Now, this is changeable. Like when you transmute or get present with what it is that you're in avoidance of, kind of like stepping into based upon the fear of the unknown, it can allow you to actually then have the space and the freedom and the ease of jumping into what it is that you've decided is the unknown, because then you know that you're not going to repeat the patterns of the past, or you know that you're not the same as your ancestors that experienced the trauma, so therefore there's nothing to fight against. And you can trust yourself enough to know that you can move forward. There is a couple of other reasons why, though, people tend to criticize and judge themselves a lot. So this is something that is really common in people that have CPTSD. So people that have experienced compounded trauma, like people that have grown up in controlling or abusive families, and they've had like trauma over time that has not been dealt with. So it's kind of like compounded. What can happen when someone's got something like that going on is everything that they experience that is unprocessed within their world kind of like stays energetically with them. And what tends to happen with abusive relationships or trauma is that the pattern gets repeated. So this is why a lot of the time, like people who've experienced abuse, if they don't deal with the pain and the trauma and everything else related to what happened to them, they often become the perpetrators because it's unprocessed in their world. So it's energetically sitting there in their world somewhere. And it's like their brain's trying to make sense of it. Yet at the same time, because of the way in which we often learn to cope with trauma, there's often a kind of like disassociation from the experience. And so we don't often realize we're repeating it and becoming the perpetrator ourselves. And a lot of us will have this resistance to perpetrating abuse on others, right? So it's like if you're someone that grew up in an abusive environment, you may be like, I'm not going to abuse others. But then when you've got all of this unprocessed trauma that you haven't dealt with yet, what can happen is you start to abuse yourself instead. So you turn all of that energy that was basically directed at you inwards on yourself as a way of trying to cope with it, which isn't the greatest way of coping with it. This, I believe, is part of what can contribute to the creation of like autoimmune conditions, right? Because it's kind of like attacking yourself. So one of the things that you can do to help yourself is to start to look at like, okay, in the moments and spaces that you were criticizing or judging yourself a lot, what is actually happening? So is it similar to something that you experienced as a kid? Is it similar to the way in which somebody treated you as a kid? Now, here's the thing is often we duplicate or learn how to be in relationship with others and ourselves through watching other people and the relationships they have with themselves. So sometimes you might have two things happening. One, you might be perpetrating, kind of like be experiencing, in a sense, the abuse that occurred as a kid, but through doing it to yourself because of the unprocessed trauma that you have. But you may also have had a parent that was maybe not that kind and loving to themselves, maybe was a perfectionist, maybe needed to get everything right, maybe needed to maintain control. And so if you had a parent like that, you may have duplicated the relationship that they had with themselves onto like the way in which you are with yourself, because, you know, you think that's the way in which to be with yourself, right? And so then you might be basically mimicking and perpetrating those judgments that they used to do to themselves and that you were aware of somehow in your universe as a child onto yourself without realizing it, okay? So this is why it's important to start to get more present with yourself in each moment and acknowledge like, okay, when I'm criticizing myself, does this sound like the way in which my mother used to be with me, or my father used to be with me? Is this like the way in which they used to be to themselves? Okay. Now, if it's either of those things, there's so many ways to change this. Sometimes it might be that you require some sort of healing session to get kind of like maybe, you know, new information or a release of the old energy that's unprocessed and unhealed so that you can start to create more ease with being you. Sometimes it's simply giving yourself permission to release that and then kind of like being in question about it. Well, hang on a minute. If I didn't need to duplicate that anymore, if that wasn't self-love, what my mother was being with herself, if that wasn't self-love, what my father was being with himself, then, and I didn't have to mimic it, how would I be with myself in a different way that's actually more loving and kind? And being in the question can actually assist you to start to step into the energy that's beyond the criticism, right? If it is, okay, this is actually reminding me of the time where, you know, or the energy that was directed at me from them or from somebody else as a kid, or this is, you know, reminding me of something that I experienced that was traumatic, that's where you might want to get some healing to assist you to shift and change things, right? But there are sometimes a couple of other things that's occurring also. So when somebody has experienced a lot of abuse and there's trauma that's unresolved, what that can do is it can leave them kind of like on this vibrational frequency that is very much congruent with demons or a particular kind of entity that is very much in a vibration of desiring to disempower people, gaslight them, make them feel like they don't have control so that they have control, right? Now, one of the things that children have a tendency to do is they have a tendency to be a lot more aware than a lot of us adults, right? And as children, you might have been aware of entities. Now, if you're in a abusive environment, a lot of the time in my experience, when people have experienced abuse, their abusers are often unhealed people that have experienced their own abuse that has been unprocessed. So they're, you know, reperpetrating something, but they're reperpetrating it because part of the way in which a lot of people deal with abuse is to disassociate and go into denial. And when you disassociate from your physical world, what happens is it leaves you open to other entities taking over. And so what can happen that is part of the creation of like the abuse cycle is that parents or other caretakers can sometimes have demon attachments or entity attachments that are working through them and basically using their body as a vessel to abuse others. And so as a child, if you were somebody that was very aware of entities, but you're in an abusive environment, you may have then disassociated or gone into denial or cut off from the capacities, because to be aware of demons or entities when you're in an abusive situation is really, really scary. Like if you can imagine that as a child, like there's kind of like no way out, or that's what it can feel like. And so rather than feeling that helpless in it, you can then cut off your awareness of it. But in the cutting off your awareness of it, that doesn't make it go away. That actually just makes you be the effect, or have kind of like a susceptibility to be the effect of those entities. So demons have a tendency to like to send telepathic thought forms to control those that they can control. So in the moments that you're criticizing yourself or judging yourself a lot, ask those two questions first. So is this something like, is this the duplication of my parents' relationships with themselves? Is this unhealed trauma that I am projecting onto myself? Or is this an entity and a telepathic communication of their thoughts that is designed to control me? Now, if it is, you can do an entity clearing. They're really easy. You just command that they go to the light. Sometimes it can be a little more complex. Like a lot of the times that will be enough. Yet sometimes it can be a little bit more complex. There can be all sorts of relationship dynamics at play, and you might be learning different things from the experience. I do have a series called Reclaiming Your Capacities with Entities that I did a while back. And the first call of that is actually free. So I will leave a link. It may contribute to some of you. I do an entity clearing in that, and I explain a little bit more about how the relationships with entities can sometimes work and how they mirror the physical world. So if you want to hear more about that, or if that's like pinging something in your universe, go check that out. It's on my website, and it may contribute to you. So if you suspect, now sometimes you can just clear these entities and then you won't be criticizing yourself so much, but if sometimes entities can actually have kind of like these obligations or these contracts with other people in your life. So if they've got some sort of unconscious relationship with that person, it might be that you're tapping into the telepathic connection with this demon based upon, your relationship with this person. And so in a sense, sometimes demons don't like, or entities don't always leave because they've got this kind of like obligation with somebody else. But even just the acknowledgement of, oh, this is an entity sending me telepathic thoughts, even just that can contribute to you actually changing the behavior you have with yourself, because then it's like not you thinking that it's you doing it. It's like, oh, this is something in the universe that is not me. And, I can choose to be more loving and kind and empowering with myself to raise my vibrational frequency so that this isn't so dominant in my world. Now, sometimes you can have this going on with people as well. So just like with the demons and the telepathic wavelength, you might be energetically tapped in to so many different people's brains without even realizing it. And I know that sounds a little bit strange too, but if you don't acknowledge how telepathic you are, you can be the effect of everybody else's thoughts, okay? And so it's important, like if you go through these different things and you're still kind of like, God, I am just criticizing myself all the time. You want to ask, like, hang on a minute. So how many people's worlds am I aware of right now? How many people's minds am I aware of right now, right? So it might be that you are aware of just how much everybody else is criticizing themselves, just how much people are judging themselves. It might be that you're so dynamically close energetically with your family that you're just kind of like perpetrating the judgment that they have of themselves onto yourself based upon what you're energetically hearing in the moment, okay? So it's important to start to look at and be aware of the people in your life's world and how they feel about themselves, so that you can start to realize what is your awareness and what is actually you, okay? Because I know it sounds weird that we might actually be able to hear everybody else's minds, but we actually can. And I know that on my journey, like that's been part of my growth has been to identify, and it's not, I'm still learning with this, but to identify where a thought pattern is actually my awareness of somebody else's world. And I can get lost in other people's thought patterns, like sometimes, that's something that I'm working on changing. But the key is to allow yourself to be aware of their world and acknowledge whatever's going on, so that then, in a sense, you're not thinking that it's you and then perpetrating it on yourself. Now, sometimes there can also be psychic attack at play. So if you've got people in your life that have a tendency to judge you a lot, maybe you've got people that are jealous of you, maybe you've got people that are envious, maybe you've just got soulmates somewhere in your world that just have a thing or two, some suppressed anger, rage, fury, hate, or maybe you trigger them because you're being something that's beyond what it is that they're willing to be. And so they have a tendency to kind of like send some energy your way that's not so great, right? If somebody's psychically attacking you and you're not acknowledging it, then what can happen is you can then, again, like perpetrate that on yourself, thinking that it's you judging you when it's actually somebody else psychically attacking you. So it's so important to acknowledge the awareness that you have when you have it. And the weird thing about psychic attack is sometimes it's really something that you can pick up on, like something that you really know, like it might be somebody at work that you kind of like know that you don't like each other, right? Yet other times it's the people that we care about the most that psychically attack us, because they will suppress things in order to try and create or maintain a relationship with us. But in that, it doesn't allow for the full expression of everything perhaps that they're feeling, or if they're not like willing to be open and honest with themselves. And so then they can kind of like direct all sorts of stuff intentionally or unintentionally, okay? Like even worry can be kind of like a psychic attack, because it's not actually an empowering energy to send someone. When you're worrying about someone, you're kind of not acknowledging the power of their being. And so family members will often send worry energetically, but in that it's sending the kind of like the wavelength or the thought form, you're not really capable of taking care of yourself, right? And so that's like a disempowering thing that then can create the criticism cycle or the judgment cycle of not thinking you're good enough, not thinking that you're able to create something. Do you see how it works? And so acknowledging that what other people's judgments, and sometimes it can, in a sense, like people will have like a resistance to this, because it's kind of like, I don't want to know like the people that I love. I don't want to know that they're judging me. Yet acknowledging it from the place of not having a point of view about it, because everybody's got stuff. And when somebody's judging you, it's not really about you. It's about what they're trying to control, or it's about what they're not willing to step into and the growth they're not willing to have, right? That's not about you. It's not personal. And so if you actually get that, it can allow you to receive it, not from the place of having to resist it or avoid it, but be present with it, so that then you don't have to perpetrate it on yourself or get locked in the cycle of criticizing and judging yourself because you're not acknowledging what you're aware of, okay? So with all that in mind, looking at whatever it is for you in each moment and starting to shift and change it. So sometimes it's actually, maybe making the decision to do some healing. Sometimes it might be commanding that the entities go to the light. Sometimes it might be just acknowledging the people in your life's world. But also it might also be a retrainment process if it is your own mind, or in a sense, like there's kind of like two parts: acknowledging what is creating that criticism and judgment, but then also, okay, how do I be with myself differently to create something different here? So in a sense, it's kind of like, and also like, what is it that I'm resisting stepping into with all of this? Because whatever it is, all of that can be serving the purpose of keeping you in a smaller reality than what it is that you deserve. So you kind of want to start to ask yourself the question, like anytime, go through this process, do what you need to do in order to shift and change it, but then also start to look at, okay, well, what ways can I celebrate myself? What ways Can I cheer myself on here? Like, what have I done great today? What have I done great with regards to this like particular theme or this particular, like if it's your body and you're judging, you notice you're criticizing your body, maybe you look in the mirror and like seeing all the lines. Okay, what do I love about my body? What's great about my body? Like, what can I acknowledge about my body today that's going to kind of like flip that 180 and give me more of that generative energy into my life instead of, the killing energy of judgment and criticism, right? Maybe it's money. So, if you're judging yourself and criticizing yourself as not being great with money, you're spending too much money. Well, hang on a minute. What have I done that's great with regards to money? Like, what money have I created? What ways have I invested or chosen to spend my money that's been supportive of myself or contributed to myself or others, right? And just kind of like patting yourself on the back for that and celebrating yourself for that can start to change the relationship and the energy flow that you have with yourself in your life. And that can kind of start to catapult you into a greater reality because, you're not constantly killing the generative energy that is available to you if you're not getting stuck in either other people's criticisms and judgments, trauma loops from the past, or your entity awareness that you haven't fully like stepped into acknowledging and using to your advantage. So I hope that this podcast has contributed to you. Thank you so much. If you've got through this 21 minutes, thank you so much for listening to me. If there's something you want me to do a podcast episode about, please do leave it in the comments. If this contributed to you, feel free to leave feedback in the comments. Also, I'm so grateful to those of you that listen and let me know that it contributes. So thank you. Until next time, see you later.